The Sailor and the Witch's Talisman. Ewan Brackett was no stranger to the sea's mercurial nature. For years he had roamed the open waters with a heart unmoored, carrying only the whisper of waves to keep him company. The Seafarer was both his refuge and his prison, a modest fishing vessel weathered by countless storms, its creaking boards holding secrets as old as the tides. Yet, on that fateful night, even Ewan's hardened soul felt unease. The storm began as a faint tremor in the air, an electric hum that tickled the skin and set the sea shivering. The horizon grew darker, a bruise spreading across the sky, and the first drops of rain fell like a prelude to chaos. Ewan had faced tempest before, but this one carried an otherworldly weight, as if the heavens themselves sought to purge the earth of its sins. Winds howled like vengeful spirits, tearing at the sails and driving the Seafarer into the maw of the storm. The mast groaned under the strain, and the deck became a treacherous battlefield of surging water. Ewan's calloused hands gripped the wheel, his knuckles white as he fought to keep his vessel afloat. Yet no matter how hard he battled, the storm seemed to mock his efforts, its ferocity growing with each passing moment. Just as the storm reached its crescendo, something inexplicable happened. The roaring winds fell silent and the waves stilled, leaving an eerie calm in their wake. Ewan blinked, disoriented, as the Seafarer drifted into a cove he had never seen before. It was a place out of time, veiled in a dense emerald fog that clung to the air like a living thing. The jagged rocks framing the shore glistened with an unnatural sheen, and the water shimmered with hues of green and gold, as though illuminated from below. Ewan dropped anchor and climbed into his skiff, drawn to the shore by an unseen force. His boots crunched against the damp sand as he stepped onto the beach, his breath forming ghostly clouds in the chill air. There, nestled among the rocks, he found it. A chest unlike any he had ever encountered. Time had enshrined the chest in a mantle of barnacles and seaweed, but its craftsmanship remained undeniable. Spiraling waves and shadowy figures danced across its surface, carved with such precision that they seemed to move in the dim light. The lock, long rusted and useless, crumbled at the slightest touch. Ewan hesitated, a primal instinct warning him to turn back, but curiosity proved stronger than caution. Inside the chest lay a single object, a talisman of otherworldly design. Shaped like a serpent coiled around its own tail, it was fashioned from a strange, iridescent metal that seemed to pulse faintly, as if alive. Intricate runes lined its surface, their meanings obscured by the passage of centuries. Ewan picked it up, and the air grew colder, the fog thickening around him. For a moment, he thought he heard whispers, soft, melodic, and unintelligible, like a language born of the sea itself. A shiver ran down his spine as he held the talisman up to the light, its serpent eyes glinting with an almost malevolent intelligence. He knew deep down that this was no ordinary artifact. Yet he slipped it into his pocket, telling himself it was just an old trinket, a relic of some long-lost sailor's superstition. As he returned to the Seafarer, the fog began to dissipate, and the sea resumed its gentle rhythm. But the talisman's presence weighed heavily against his chest, its touch unnervingly warm. Ewan cast one last glance at the cove, its mysterious beauty now shrouded in shadow. The storm had ended, but something far more profound had been unleashed. The Seafarer drifted gently now, its battered sails whispering secrets to the night wind. Ewan Brackett leaned against the rail, the talisman clutched in his hand. Though he told himself it was nothing more than a curious find, he couldn't ignore the peculiar energy emanating from the artifact. It seemed to hum softly, a resonance just on the edge of hearing, like the echo of distant waves in an empty shell. He turned it over in his hands, tracing the intricate runes with his roughened fingers. Each line and curve felt purposeful, deliberate, as though the talisman had been crafted with knowledge that transcended human understanding. The serpent's eyes glinted faintly under the silver glow of the moon, their gaze unyielding. "I should throw it overboard," Ewan muttered to himself, though he made no move to do so. Instead, he pulled out a rag and began polishing the surface, hoping to unveil more of its secrets. As he rubbed away centuries of grime, the metal grew warm beneath his touch. A faint, golden light began to pulse from the serpent's coiled form, casting eerie shadows across the deck. The hum grew louder. It was no longer just a sound. It was a presence, alive and insistent, vibrating through the air and into Ewan's chest. He froze as the talisman slipped from his grasp and landed on the deck with a resounding thud. The light surged, bright and blinding, and the hum transformed into a deep, resonant voice that seemed to rise from the ocean itself. "Awaken!" Ewan staggered backward, his heart pounding as the Seafarer began to tremble. The calm sea rippled unnaturally, as though something immense stirred beneath the surface. The moonlight dimmed, and a cold wind swept across the deck, carrying with it a scent of salt and decay. Peering over the rail, Ewan saw them, ethereal lights, faint and shimmering, spiraling up from the depths. At first, they looked like drifting jellyfish, their forms soft and nebulous. But as they drew closer, they coalesced into shapes, figures that were distinctly humanoid, yet undeniably alien. Their eyes burned with an ancient intelligence, their forms cloaked in flowing tendrils of light and water. 3 of them rose fully from the waves, towering above the deck. The first was cloaked in a shifting veil of mist, its face a cascade of rain. The second shone with the brilliance of moonlight on water, its translucent form rippling with every movement. The third bore the weight of the abyss, its dark visage streaked with silver like veins of deep-sea minerals. Ewan's breath caught as the three figures spoke in unison, their voices a symphony of thunder and tide. "Who dares disturb the slumber of the spirits?" The talisman began to glow fiercely on the deck, its serpent uncoiling as if alive. Ewan stumbled forward, his voice faltering. I didn't mean to disturb anything. I found it. I didn't know." The spirits loomed closer, their forms casting an unnatural light across the ship. The one cloaked in mist spoke first, its voice like raindrops striking stone. "You carry the talisman of the sea witch, she who bound us in the depths. It is a key to power long forgotten, a covenant broken by your touch." The second spirit, luminous and serene, gestured toward the talisman. "This relic bears the mark of the ocean's wrath and mercy. Its awakening is no accident. The sea chooses its emissary, but with that choice comes judgment." Ewan's pulse quickened. "Judgment? I didn't ask for this. I'm just a sailor trying to make a living." The third spirit, dark and sorrowful, leaned close, its abyssal eyes piercing. "The talisman has chosen you. You have summoned us, and now you must answer." The water churned around the ship, and the spirits spoke as one. "You are bound to the ancient covenant. You will face the trials of courage, wisdom, and heart. Should you fail, the sea shall claim you, and rise to claim the world." Ewan stared at them, his mind reeling. The talisman, glowing fiercely, seemed to pulse in rhythm with his racing heart. The spirits waited, their presence pressing down on him like the weight of the ocean itself. "What if I succeed?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The luminous spirit tilted its head, a hint of something akin to sorrow flickering across its face. "Then the covenant is restored, and the seas may yet forgive." Ewan's gaze dropped to the talisman. The serpent's eyes burned into his soul, unyielding. With a deep breath, he nodded. "I'll face your trials." The spirits swirled around him, their forms dissolving into light and water. Their voices echoed as they descended, pulling the Seafarer into a vortex of shimmering waves. "Then let the trials begin." As the ship vanished beneath the spiraling waters, Ewan Brackett felt the weight of the ocean press against his chest and knew there was no turning back. The vortex carried Ewan into a realm unlike any he had known. The Seafarer dissolved into the currents, leaving him adrift in a sea that was both infinite and confining. The water was not water. It felt heavier, imbued with a strange vitality, and glimmered with hues of emerald and obsidian. Stars, as if borrowed from the heavens, floated lazily beneath the surface, and the air, thick with salt, clung to his lungs like a living thing. Ewan drifted, disoriented, until the current stilled and the spirits appeared again, their colossal forms rising from the waves. The mist-shrouded one spoke first, its voice rolling like distant thunder. The trial of courage lies before you. You will walk the labyrinth of storms, find your way, or be consumed by fear. Before Ewan could reply, the sea around him heaved, shaping itself into a labyrinth of towering, translucent walls that shimmered like liquid glass. The air crackled with static, and he realized the walls were alive with storms. Lightning arced through their surfaces, casting fleeting shadows that twisted and writhed. He hesitated, his breath ragged. The labyrinth was a maze of chaos, the roar of thunder and the hiss of waves creating a cacophony that made his pulse quicken. But the talisman, still coiled tightly around his wrist, pulsed with a steady warmth, as if urging him forward. With a muttered curse, he stepped into the labyrinth. The path was treacherous. Shadows danced on the walls, morphing into monstrous shapes that snarled and lunged, vanishing just before they reached him. The air grew colder with each step, and whispers filled the space, taunting, mocking, dredging up memories of failures and fears he thought he had buried. "You couldn't save her," one voice hissed, and Ewan froze. He knew the words were a lie, or at least not entirely true. Yet the sound of his daughter's laughter, faint and fleeting, rose above the storm. He clenched his fists, forcing himself to move forward. The labyrinth seemed endless, its twists and turns leading him back to the same crossroads. Each time the walls grew darker, the whispers louder. Panic clawed at him, but the talisman burned hotter, its steady glow piercing the shadows. With grim determination, he pressed onward, his mind fixed on the faint hope that there was an end. Finally, he saw it, a single opening ahead, its edges glowing faintly gold. With one last surge of strength, he stumbled through, collapsing onto a smooth surface as the labyrinth dissolved into mist. The mist-shrouded spirit loomed above him. "You have faced your fears and endured. But courage is only the first thread in the tapestry." Ewan barely had time to catch his breath before the second spirit, luminous and serene, stepped forward. Its voice was a soothing melody, but its words carried a grave weight. "The trial of wisdom awaits. Witness the sins of the sea." The waves surged around him, and Ewan found himself standing on the deck of a ship. Not the Seafarer, but a vessel far larger and grander, with sails that glistened like silk. It was no ordinary ship. It was a memory, though not his own. Around him, sailors worked tirelessly, their faces worn by greed and desperation. They hauled nets brimming with fish, their bounty spilling onto the deck with reckless abandon. As he watched, the scene shifted. The sea darkened, and the nets became empty, their once abundant harvest reduced to nothing. The sailors' faces turned hollow, their eyes accusing. Ewan felt their anger, their despair, their hunger. Then came the ships of war, cannons blazing, staining the waters red. Oil slicked the surface, choking the life from it. The once pristine sea had become a graveyard. The spirit's voice echoed in his mind. "What do you see, sailor?" Ewan swallowed hard. "I see greed, destruction, humanity's hand turned against the very waters that give it life. And what will you do with this wisdom?" He hesitated, the weight of the question pressing down on him. At last he said, "I'll remember. I'll teach others to respect the sea, to honor it." The spirit regarded him, its luminous form flickering. "You have seen the past. Now you must face the future." Before he could respond, the third spirit, dark and sorrowful, took its place. Its voice was a low, mournful song that resonated deep within him. "The trial of heart is the heaviest of all. Prepare yourself, sailor, for what lies ahead will test your very soul." The waters rose around him, and Ewan felt himself sinking. As the ocean claimed him, he caught one last glimpse of the spirits, their forms blending with the darkness. The talisman burned against his chest, its light the only anchor in the encroaching abyss. Ewan's descent into the depths was slow and disorienting. The water was cold but not suffocating, wrapping around him like an ancient shroud. He didn't swim or sink, but seemed to drift, drawn deeper by unseen forces. Around him the ocean grew darker, the faint luminescence of ethereal lights flickering like dying stars. The weight of the abyss pressed against his chest, yet the talisman pulsed steadily, its warmth a tenuous tether to something greater. When he finally stopped, he found himself standing, not on the seafloor, but on a surreal expanse of glassy water that reflected nothing. Above and below, the void stretched endlessly. In this stillness, Ewan's own heartbeat sounded thunderous. The third spirit emerged from the shadows, its sorrowful visage more imposing now. Its voice resonated through the stillness, heavy with unspoken grief. "The trial of heart begins. Here you will face what you have lost, what you fear, and what you cherish most. The heart's weight is the heaviest burden of all." Before Ewan could speak, the space around him began to shift. The dark void fractured like cracked ice, and scenes from his life flickered into existence. He saw himself as a young man, setting sail for the first time. The naive determination in his younger face made him flinch. The memory of that untempered optimism a sharp contrast to the weariness he now carried. The scene dissolved into something more painful. A sunlit shore, where his wife and daughter waved as he boarded the Seafarer. It was a memory he had tried to bury, but the ocean had dredged it up from his soul. His daughter's laughter echoed, clear and bright, and for a fleeting moment, Ewan smiled. But then the scene darkened, the sunlight snuffed out by storm clouds. The shore vanished, replaced by towering waves and the sound of a voice screaming his name. Ewan staggered back, his fists clenched. "Enough!" he shouted, his voice trembling. "I know what I lost. I've lived with it every day." The spirit loomed closer, its dark form suffused with flickering veins of silver. "To carry pain is not enough, sailor. Will you confront it? Or will you drown in its depths?" The space shifted again, and this time a figure appeared before him. His breath caught as he recognized her, his daughter Sarah. Her face as luminous and full of life as it'd been on that last day. She smiled at him, and he felt the familiar pang of joy and sorrow intertwined. "Papa," she said softly, her voice carrying across the still air. "You don't have to leave again. You can stay here. With me." Ewan's heart ached at the offer. She stepped closer, and the warmth of her presence was undeniable. It was her, exactly as he remembered, down to the way her hair caught the light. For a moment, he wanted to believe it, wanted to let go of the years of guilt and longing and let himself stay. But the talisman burned hot against his chest, and he realized the truth. This was no reunion. It was a test, a cruel illusion designed to break him. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to step back. "I can't," he said, his voice breaking. "You're not her. My Sarah is gone, and I have to let her go. I have to let myself live." The figure's smile faltered, and the light in her eyes dimmed. "If you leave, you'll lose me forever." Ewan nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I already did." The figure dissolved, and the darkness around him shattered. The spirit's voice returned low and mournful. "You have faced the weight of your heart and endured. Few emerge from this trial unbroken." The void around him began to brighten, and he felt the currents lifting him, pulling him back toward the surface. The spirit's form faded into the waves, its parting words echoing in his mind. "Remember, sailor? The heart is the anchor of all things. To wield it is to master the tides." As Ewan broke the surface of the water, gasping for air, he found himself back aboard the Seafarer. The ship gleamed as if restored anew, and the talisman's glow had dimmed to a soft, steady warmth. Above him, the sky was clear, the stars shining like beacons of hope. But the spirits were not finished with him yet. Their forms appeared above the waves, their voices uniting in a final decree. "You have faced courage, wisdom, and heart. The covenant nears its restoration, but one task remains. Sail on and find the answer that lies within." Ewan gripped the wheel, his resolve firm. The trials had changed him, reshaped him. The man who now steered the Seafarer was no longer running from the past. He was moving towards something greater, though he did not yet know what it was. The Seafarer glided across a sea that seemed otherworldly, its surface smooth as glass and glowing faintly in the moonlight. The winds had stilled, and the silence was profound, broken only by the rhythmic creak of the ship's timbers and the soft hum of the talisman against Ewan's chest. The air felt charged, heavy with anticipation, as though the ocean itself held its breath. Ewan stood at the helm, his hands steady on the wheel. The trials had left him weary, but his resolve was unshaken. The spirits had spoken of one final task, an answer that lay within, but their cryptic words offered little clarity. He gazed out at the horizon, searching for a sign, when the sea began to shift once more. A ripple disturbed the stillness, spreading outward in concentric circles. From the depths, a faint light emerged, growing brighter with each passing moment. Ewan leaned forward, his pulse quickening as the light took shape. It was not another spirit, but an island, a jagged outcropping of rock that seemed to rise impossibly from the water, crowned with a single ancient tree whose gnarled branches stretched skyward like grasping fingers. The talisman grew warm against his chest, guiding him toward the island. As the Seafarer approached, the ship slowed, drawn gently to shore as if carried by unseen hands. Ewan stepped onto the rocky beach, the crunch of sand and stone beneath his boots echoing in the stillness. The air here was different, thick with the scent of salt and earth, and charged with a strange, electric energy. At the center of the island stood the tree, its bark silvered with age, and its leaves shimmering with an unnatural light. Beneath it, nestled among the roots, was a pedestal cut from the same iridescent metal as the talisman. Runes spiraled across its surface, glowing faintly in the moonlight. The talisman pulsed more insistently now, as if urging him forward. Ewan approached the pedestal, his heart pounding. As he neared, the voices of the spirits returned, their tones weaving together in a haunting symphony. The covenant is not yet whole. To restore it, you must choose the sea's blessing or the sea's wrath. The talisman will reflect the path of your heart. Ewan's brow furrowed as he placed the talisman on the pedestal. It fit perfectly, the runes aligning with those on the metal surface. A surge of energy coursed through the air, and the island trembled as the tree's roots glowed with an inner light. The spirits' voices grew louder, resonating with a terrible power. Will you protect the sea, or will you wield its power? Choose wisely, for the fate of the waters and of humanity rests in your hands. Ewan stared at the talisman, its serpent uncoiling and shifting, its metallic scales glinting in the ethereal light. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, heavier than the trials he had faced. The sea had given him everything, his livelihood, his freedom, but it had also taken so much. His wife, his daughter. Countless lives are lost to storms, greed and neglect. The temptation to wield the sea's power was strong. With it, he could command the tides, tame the storms, and exact justice on those who had desecrated the oceans. But deep down, he knew that was not his path. The sea was not meant to be ruled, but to be revered, a force both beautiful and untamable, deserving of respect. I will protect it, Ewan said softly. his voice trembling. "The sea doesn't belong to me or to anyone. It's a gift, a miracle, and it's time we started treating it that way." The talisman glowed brilliantly, the serpent coiling once more into its original form. A wave of warmth washed over Ewan, and the spirits' voices softened, their tones now carrying a note of approval. "You have chosen wisely, sailor. The covenant is restored, and the sea will remember your name. Go forth and carry this truth to those who dwell on the land. Let them see the ocean as it is, a source of life, a mirror of the soul." The pedestal faded, the tree's light dimming as the island began to dissolve. Ewan stepped back onto the Seafarer, the talisman now cool and quiet against his chest. The ship moved on its own, carried away from the island as it vanished beneath the waves, leaving only a ripple in its place. As dawn broke on the horizon, Ewan felt a profound sense of peace. The trials had tested him, broken him, and rebuilt him. He was no longer just a sailor, adrift and untethered. He was a guardian, bound by a sacred promise to protect the waters that had shaped his life. The spirits were gone, their forms fading into the depths, but their presence lingered in the wind, the waves, and the endless expanse of the sea. And as the seafarer sailed toward the rising sun, Ewan knew his journey was far from over. The miracle of redemption was not an end, but a beginning, a call to honor the covenant and to carry the wisdom of the ocean to the world above.